Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be previewing the second round matchup between the San Jose Sharks and the Colorado Avalanche. The Colorado Avalanche were the final seed of the Western Conference, the final seed of the entire league. This is a team that will not have home ice for the entire playoffs, no matter who they play, as they are that last place. However, they are not to be underestimated as they went up against the first in the conference Calgary Flames, a solid team throughout the regular season, over 100 points, I believe second in the league, if I'm not mistaken, in the standings, maybe right behind Boston for third place in the league, but they handled them quite easily. After getting shut out in Game 1, they managed to win the next 4. Yes, a couple of overtime ones, but also a couple of dominant victories. In one of the games, I think Game 3, the Avalanche had 56 shots in regulation, so the Avalanche sort of easily knocking off the Calgary Flames. As Sharks definitely don't want to take that for granted. In the San Jose Sharks corner, they had a hard-fought series against their rivals, the Vegas Golden Knights. It took 7 games to knock them out. It took the Sharks being down 3-1 after 4 games to be able to win Game 5, 6, and 7 to get this matchup with the Colorado Avalanche. And as such, the Sharks have had only a couple days off since their last game, while the Avalanche have had about a week off before their last game. So we'll see if the Sharks, being a bit more still in the game speed, will work out compared to the Avalanche maybe being a bit rusty, or will it be the Sharks being dead tired from playing a couple of overtimes to end that series compared to the Avalanche being quite well rested? For regular season matchups between these two teams, and before I do get into this, the regular season does certainly matter somewhat, but if these playoffs have shown anything, it doesn't really matter all that much. We've seen all 4 division winners be eliminated in the first round. The Calgary Flames themselves were 3-0 against the Avalanche this season, and yet they lost in 5 games. So the Sharks being 3-0 against the Avalanche doesn't mean too much, but still something of note. Their first game, January 2nd, a 5-4 victory over the Sharks in Colorado, and then 2 victories in San Jose. March 1st, 4-3 San Jose win, and then April 6th, a 5-2 San Jose win. The April 6th one is, I guess, a bit of note because it was the last game of the season, so right before the playoffs, and if I'm not mistaken, it was the Avalanche's only regulation loss during their last 10 games of the season, so the Sharks were able to knock them off even when they were playing some great hockey. So in total, the Sharks managed to outscore them by a score of 14-9, not the biggest margin, but still, I guess, somewhat notable. For the lineups, I have the Sharks with Timo Meier, Couture, and Nyquist on the first line. Joe Pavelski has been confirmed to basically not be playing the first couple games of this series, and I feel like it's mostly a 2018 Joe Thornton scenario where you don't want to rule him out for the series, as you always want to, I guess, fake out the other team that he may just come back, but it seems very unlikely that he'll play at least for this series. Maybe the next one could potentially open something up for him, but it's unlikely. Second line, I have Kane, Hurdle, and Donskoy. I've inserted Donskoy here mostly just in hopes that he can play. Of course, he did not play Game 7 due to an injury. And at this point, I'm just hoping he can play Game 1, because otherwise the Sharks will probably have to move Melker Karlsson up to the second line. It'll be like a bit of a mess in terms of the lineup. So again, crossing my fingers here. The third line, Sorensen, Thornton, LeBanc, the only line for the Sharks that remains intact from what it was at the start of the Golden Knights series, and that's good because this has been a pretty consistent, solid line for the Sharks, basically for the majority of the season, even the regular season. And then a fourth line of Radil, Goodrow, and Karlsson. Radil was a tire fire in general during Game 7, so not the best to have him in the lineup necessarily, but he might be the Sharks' best option just due to the amount of injuries they have. Luckily for him, he plays on a line with series hero Barclay Goodrow, so he doesn't have to do much because Goodrow is the greatest player of all time. So he's got that going for him. What is Goodrow, Canadian? So maybe the Canadian Gretzky. Well, Gretzky's already Canadian, but whatever. This generation's Gretzky. On to the scratches for the Sharks. Michael Haley remains injured from, I think, Game 2 or Game 3. There has been basically zero update about Michael Haley's condition. I have no idea what's going on with him. Is he injured? Is he dead? Is he available but just not playing? I have no idea. If he is available, I would hope he'd take Radil's spot. I don't really like Michael Haley, but he can't be any worse than Radil was in that Game 7, so why not? Gambrell is a potential fill-in. He has played a couple games for the Sharks this season, and the Barracuda are out of the Colorado Cup Playoffs, having lost 3-1 to the San Diego Gulls. So basically every AHL player is available, but again, Gambrell has played at least a couple games with the Sharks this season, and so he's a potential option. And then I have Pavelski anyways, even though it's unlikely for him to play, but just to, have him there, because I'm sure DeBoer will keep him as an option for the entire series if it comes to it. Onto the defense, Vlasic and Burns as the top pairing, then Dillon and Carlson as the second pairing, with Ryan and Braun as the third pairing. This is the defensive pairings that came into the playoffs with. However, Erik Karlsson still very much banged up. Vlasic is probably playing through an injury, although it might not look like that. And I'm sure there are a couple other players who are dealing with something. And then Tim Heed is the seventh defenseman here. For the goaltending, Jones obviously leads the way. It was a bit of a question mark whether or not he would actually when we came to about Game 5 of the Golden Knights series, but it's pretty clear now that he is the starter and Arundel is the backup for them. For the lineup for the Avalanche, this is the lineup mostly the lineup that they ran for Game 5 against the Colorado Avalanche. First line, McKinnon, Kerfoot, and Landeskog. They are splitting up that big three, at least at the moment. I don't know how long that's going to last. So Rantanen's on the second line, Kerfoot's on the first line. Kerfoot's a pretty good player, not Rantanen level, but he's pretty good, certainly. Landeskog, obviously quite strong, the captain of the Avalanche. And of course, McKinnon, one of the best players in the league, probably the best player left, at least on the western side of the playoff bracket. I mean, Kerfoot could be like a bag of pucks, and McKinnon could probably make him score a couple goals. That's how good he is. He was so good for the Avalanche during that first round series against the Flames, so that's really one of the major worries for the Sharks going into this series. Second line, as I said, of Rantanen with Soderberg and Wilson. Doesn't normally jump off the page, but Soderberg and Wilson have actually had quite the solid seasons, resurgent seasons for them, for the Avalanche. A good part of their success now, because it seemed as though they weren't going to have much depth, but with those two contributing, it has allowed them to actually win some games. A third line of Compher, Nieto, and Calvert. Calvert, a player really built for the playoffs. Solid offseason signing for them. Compher, pretty clutch for the Avalanche. And Matt Nieto, who was actually quite good for the Avalanche during that first round series. Of course, Sharks fans will probably remember Matt Nieto and be surprised that he's good for anything, but he's been doing pretty well with the Avalanche in his tenure there. On the fourth line, Bourque, Jost, and Andrighetto. Jost and Andrighetto, both decent offensive player options on the fourth line. Bourque, okay himself. And then as a fill-in, Brassard, who is injured at the moment. I have zero update on what exactly is wrong with Brassard. It's possible he plays in Game 1. It's possible he doesn't play in Game 1. I have no idea. If he does play, I would assume he probably bumps Bourque out of the lineup. Jost will move to the wing, and Brassard will play the center. Either that be fourth line or third line or whatever. For the defense, this is where the small difference is from the lineup against the Calgary Flames in Game 5 and what will be playing for the Game 1 against the Sharks. Sam Girard was not in that game. He will be back for Game 1. I assume he'll take his spot next to Erik Johnson, as he was mostly with him during the regular season, and as such, I moved everybody down. Against the Flames, it was Johnson, Cole, Barry, Zadorov, and then Makar, Nemeth. So I have Girard now with Johnson and moved everybody down, as I said. So Girard, Johnson, a solid pairing. Girard, maybe not the best defensively, but quite creative offensively. Erik Johnson, one of the more underrated defensemen in the NHL, quite good at what he does. Then Cole and Barry. Cole, a strong stay-at-home defenseman, while Barry is a bit more of a roamer. Very similar to when Burns plays with someone like Shemek or someone like Vlasic, where Cole sort of allows Barry to do his thing. Barry is sort of like a Burns light, not as good as Burns in really any area, but plays in a similar fashion. Then Zadorov and Makar. Zadorov, a physically imposing defenseman, as well as Makar, who I believe played his first NHL game in Game 3 against the Calgary Flames in the playoffs. Transitioned seamlessly from college. He was quite good in those few games that he did get against the Flames, so he could potentially be like an X factor for the Avalanche moving forward in this series. And then potential fill-ins, Patrick Nemeth and Mark Barberio could fill in theory if someone does get injured. For the goaltending, it is Grubauer leading the way, picked up in a trade with the Washington Capitals at last year's draft to potentially fill in for Varlamov, as Varlamov is a very injury-prone goalie. Grubauer ends up taking the starting role. Even though he didn't start off the season so well, he ended it pretty solidly, and of course he cemented his spot as the starter with those games against the Calgary Flames. Very good stats for him. Varlamov will be the backup. Hasn't played in a while, so I don't know how fresh he is, but if he does need to fill in, he's certainly shown in the past that he is capable of being a very good goaltender. For the stats of the series, of course, you have to remember that the Sharks did play 7 games in their series, while the Avalanche only did play 5, and so that does skew the stats a bit. Rantanen with 9 points and Karlsson with 9 points. Rantanen, especially with the 5 goals, is certainly more impressive, having done it in 2 less games. But for the Sharks, Karlsson led the way with 9 assists, then Hertl and Couture both with 6 goals and 2 assists for 8 points. Then LeBanc, 2 goals, 3 assists with 5 points, and a bunch of Sharks players after that have 4. Then for the Avalanche, it's Rantanen with 5 goals, 4 assists for 9 points. McKinnon 5 goals, 3 assists, or 3 goals, 5 assists for 8 points. Barrie with 0 goals, 5 assists for 5 points. And then Landeskog with 1 goal, 3 assists for 4 points. Then there's a couple of other players with 4 points, but I felt like Landeskog was more appropriate to include here, as he's obviously one of the bigger Avalanche names. For the goaltenders, Martin Jones, a 3.2 GAA and a .904 save percentage. Of course, this is heavily skewed by his very poor games 2 to 4. And is also because if you take into account the fact that he was a lot better in games 5 to 7, the stats would look a lot better. I think he had close to a .950 save percentage in just those last 3 games. We'll see if the Sharks actually do get a performance out of games 5 to 7 Jones, or if they will get back a performance from games 2 to 4 Jones. For the Avalanche, Grubauer, 1.89 GAA and a .939 save percentage. Very, very good stats, especially against a team like the Calgary Flames, who were quite offensively gifted during the regular season. And so some great goaltending there for the Avalanche. In terms of my analysis of the series, well, there is some good news and some bad news for the San Jose Sharks. The good news would be is that I don't think the Avalanche are as good of a team as the Golden Knights. I think the Golden Knights are actually somewhat underrated around the league, even though I think were 6th or 7th in points in the Western Conference. I do think they're one of the top teams in even the league in general. Just very well built, very well structured, and everything like that. Very well coached, as much as I don't like to say that about the Golden Knights coach. And so if I was coming into round 1 and I had to choose between the Sharks facing the Avalanche and the Sharks facing the Golden Knights, I would choose the Avalanche every day of the week. I do think they have not as much depth as the Golden Knights. I don't think they have as much structure. I don't think they have as much defensive structure is what I'm talking about. I don't think they're as hard on the forecheck as the Golden Knights. And I don't think their goaltender could potentially be as clutch. Grubauer's been very good during the first round, but Fleury has shown, at least in the past couple of years, I won't talk about like 2010 to 2015 where it's been where it was a bit rough for Fleury, but in the past couple of years he has shown the ability to be clutch in the playoffs, and he did show that somewhat in the first round series against the San Jose Sharks. Grubauer, I don't know if that's the case. This is his first year as not a backup, so we'll see how he actually manages to hold up. In terms of bad news for the San Jose Sharks, while the Avalanche are not as deep, they do have a higher end set of players than the Golden Knights. I would say Rantanen and Mark Stone are relatively similar skill. Mark Stone obviously having the defense, but Rantanen probably a bit better offensively. But of course, as I said, McKinnon probably definitely the best player left, at least forward, in this series. And if you consider the fact that Karlsson is very injured and Burns hasn't been that great offensively, probably the best player in this series as well. Maybe the best player in just the Western Conference side of the bracket. He's definitely the big X factor here for the Colorado Avalanche, as well as the rest of that mostly first line. He definitely has shown the ability to be able to carry this team to wins that they may or may not actually deserve with the way that they're playing that night. And with the fact that Erik Karlsson is quite injured, we've seen that the Mark Stone line, Mark Stone, Stastny, and Pacioretty was able to take advantage of that multiple times, and I would assume that the McKinnon, Landeskog, and usually Rantanen, but sometimes Kerfoot line could probably take advantage of it even more, just because McKinnon uses his speed so well, and he'll probably be able to walk around even some of the non-injured defensemen for the San Jose Sharks. So Martin Jones will have to be at the top of his game, and that brings me to another potential bad news. Martin Jones, who knows what Martin Jones we're going to get for the majority of this series. Yes, the Sharks were able to come back from the brink down 3-1 in the series to be able to win, but would they be able to do that again if Martin Jones has another couple bad games, or will they actually just end up losing if Martin Jones isn't ready to play right away? And the final piece of bad news for the San Jose Sharks is, of course, the massive amount of injuries that they are dealing with at the moment. Erik Karlsson not close to 100%, and again, that could be a problem against a fast team like the Avalanche. Vlasic is likely playing through some pain, even though he seems to be quite solid. Pavelski, their captain, is injured, probably won't play this series. Michael Haley won't play this series. Shemek, of course, won't play this series. And Donskoy is somewhat injured as well. So the Sharks, a ton of forward depth, but they're sort of dropping like flies here. This team is being held together by like duct tape and glue at this point. And so it could potentially be tough, especially against, again, a very fast team like the Avalanche, who might be able to skate around a lot of these tired players. That actually, I said that was my last bad news, but I guess this is sort of in conjunction with that. The Sharks also have played a longer series, which I said could potentially benefit with them because of the fact that they're more in game I guess, at game speed. But Burns has been playing a ton of minutes, averaging over 30 minutes a game over that first series. You can't imagine he'll be able to hold up that much for that much longer if he has to continue doing it. I mean, that's a ton of ice time to ask of a player, so that could also potentially be something bad going forward. But in terms of my prediction for the Sharks, I had predicted the last series correctly. I said the Sharks in 7, and that's what happened. So I'm feeling a bit more bold this time. I've decided to go a bit more aggressive in terms of my prediction. I have a bit more leeway, and as such, I will say that the Sharks will defeat the Colorado Avalanche in just 5 games to move on to the third round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs to face off against either the St. Louis Blues or the Dallas Stars. Class dismissed.